What do you got going on here?
So today I'm going to ride the coil shock and the air shock on my new frame.
What's the difference with the air shock and the coil shock?
The damper is the same on both shocks, and the valving is both exactly the same as well. So really it's just the spring that's different. This is obviously a coil spring, that's an air spring, and the spring curve of an air spring looks a little bit different than a coil spring. Here, it'd be easier to draw it. So here's my graph. You have force here, top out here, and bottom out here. So a coil spring looks like it progresses at a pretty consistent gradient, almost perfectly straight. And an air spring has a little bit higher initial force and then ramps up a lot at the end of the stroke. So this is a little bit of an exaggeration. Honestly, the new ones are very similar.
Why does the air spring have a curve to it and not just a straight line?
So as I understand it, the initial force is due to the negative spring, because at top out, the negative spring is bottomed out. So it's, as this rapidly increases at the end, the negative spring is rapidly decreasing, which gives it that kind of nose to it. And then it's pretty consistent after that and ramps up at the end as, like anyone can imagine, compressed air.
Why don't you just ride the coil?
Well, there's a few benefits to riding the air shock. For one, it's more tunable. You can tune the spring rate to like 1 psi, so you can make micro adjustments there. You can add volume spacers to make that ramp up at the end more or less. The air shock's lighter. I'm not sure how much. I think it's like around 200, 250 grams lighter.
Is there ever a situation where you just like switch between the two, or are you trying to just figure out one or the other?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, depending on the track, depending on what you want out of it, it's nice with Fox to have both options.
How come the air spring is more common in a fork than a shock?
I don't really know for sure, but I would guess that they have so much more space to work with that they can make a nicer spring curve. And the fork being 1-to-1, you don't have the mechanical advantage of the frame. That ramp up of the air spring curve is nice in the fork at bottom out.
What is the consensus?
So for sure I could race both shocks. They're super similar. I did a couple of GoPro runs, like one section that was more a traditional downhill track and then another section that was more of a motorway section, both short, so I could be pretty consistent on both. And I think I preferred the coil, like comfort wise. It felt like on double edge impact, bike's loaded and hits another impact, it just felt a little bit smoother there, like less harsh on those hits. It also felt like when you went to push in with your feet, you felt like you knew exactly where you were in the travel. It was just like a little bit more pronounced. And my bike's progressive enough that I have no issues with bottom out. I think this leverage ratio is pretty good for downhill. So the coil shock works really well on it. The air shock was good as well. It felt really good. I don't know why, because it maybe doesn't make perfect sense, but like it felt like it had a better contact with the ground. The wheel would stay more planted on the ground. I don't know if it's something to do with like the way that the positive negative balance works, but when you would hit something that would kick the bike in the air and then it would land, it would just stick. And I've kind of noticed that from the beginning when they first started making the X2 Air, like a downhill air shock. It was really good for that sort of stuff, which you'd kind of think a coil would be good at. It was nice. And then like anytime you had like a big like a low speed impact, like a G out or a berm, like the air shock felt pretty nice in there. Just looking at the GoPro, like the times were within a second, so I'll have to look on the computer to see which is faster, but both were super similar. I could definitely race both. I did a couple of full runs as well at the end, and I couldn't tell any difference with the shock changing over the course of the run. I'm a racer, so I'll probably do the same thing like 10 more times this season with these two shocks, but I definitely like the feeling of the coil, and I think the coil is like easier to get a good setting right away as well, whereas the air has more things you can do, more tuning options. So I think, yeah, we'll see what happens.